Stephanie White was pissed. Stephanie White was pissed right there, right? So from that point on, now we're going to go here. Now we're going to go here, guys. You see right here, Caitlin Clark is right here. She's been subbed out of the game. That's why she's standing. The players that are sitting are the ones in the game. This means Stephanie White snatched her out of the game after.
Take a close look at that entire sequence. Caitlin Clark had just knocked down a three-pointer, and on the previous possession, she recorded 2 assists. She's playing well. The game is tied at 67, and then 1 turnover occurs. Just a single mistake, and suddenly she's pulled from the game, completely disappearing for the rest of the night, with the game continuing and never seeing her return.
Watch this. I don't think she was hurt like that. I think her ass got benched and pulled by Stephanie White because it's nonsense going on. Pay attention.
Fever. Well, the consistency that Phoenix is looking for, but let's look at this. Take a look at Caitlin Clark. How deep
Okay, that is Caitlin Clark hitting the 3.
she is when she comes off that screen.
That's Caitlin Clark hitting the 3. Now, this is...
To understand what really happened, let's break down the timeline carefully because every detail matters. The clip that everyone keeps pointing to, where Clark briefly reaches for her back, took place in the second quarter with roughly 6 minutes left on the clock. After that moment, she stayed in the game for another 4 minutes during the same quarter. She scored, looked completely comfortable, showed no limp, displayed no visible discomfort, and wasn't substituted because of an injury. Then the third quarter began, and she returned to the floor playing exactly as usual. She knocked down a deep three-pointer, continued facilitating the offense, and everything appeared entirely normal until the turnover sequence we just watched. Now this is where the timeline becomes even more interesting. From the instant she touched her back to the moment she actually exited the game, nearly 12 minutes of game time had passed. 12 full minutes. She played through all of it without any obvious signs of trouble. That's not typically how back injuries unfold in professional sports. When a player suffers a legitimate back issue serious enough to force them out of a game, they usually don't continue playing another 12 minutes at full intensity first. They don't sink contested three-pointers, and they don't make quick, sharp cuts in defensive rotations. Something simply doesn't seem to add up.
Clark, 5 seconds. Defended by Held.
Okay, the Caitlin Clark turns it over right there. Now watch Caitlin Clark not sprint back, and Stephanie White is gonna be pissed.
Hunter with the steal. Up the floor.
Here comes
Thomas,
Alyssa
up the floor. Held now. Lays it
Look
up
at
and in.
Stephanie White.
White has seen enough. We are tied at 67.
Stephanie White was pissed. Hold on, let me play it for you one more time.
5 seconds.
Okay, here comes the Caitlin Clark turnover, guys. I'm gonna add myself just for a second.
Take a closer look at Stephanie White's body language during this entire sequence because it reveals a lot. The instant that turnover happens and Clark doesn't immediately sprint back on defense, White jumps off the bench. She's not calmly calling for a timeout to make a substitution, and she's not signaling to the training staff that a player is injured. Instead, she appears visibly frustrated. Watch her expression closely. It looks like frustration rather than concern. It comes across as a coach who just watched her star player make a mental mistake in a tied game and had finally reached her limit. This also fits into a pattern that has been developing throughout the season between White and Clark. White has consistently been quick to take Clark out after mistakes, sometimes following just one turnover or a single defensive lapse. That coaching approach may work with certain players, but with a competitor like Caitlin Clark, who is accustomed to playing through mistakes and figuring things out on the court, that style can create tension. We've also seen signs of that tension in earlier games. This isn't the first time Clark has been pulled shortly after making a mistake, but it may be the first time the situation appeared to escalate to the point where Clark seemed done for the rest of the night.
Stephanie White pulled her. After that one mistake, Stephanie White pulled her. Now this is where it gets fishy. Caitlin Clark is just gonna leave. Who's walking? Like, where's the training staff? Where's the staff at? Where's the trainers at? If she's hurt, now y'all tell me in an NBA game when a player is hurt, What player just walks to the locker room with no trainers, nobody asks, no trainers in the huddle is asking what's going on with her back?
Now here's the moment that brings the entire narrative into focus. Caitlin Clark is standing with her teammates during the timeout huddle. She's not sitting on the bench while medical staff examine her, and she's not showing visible signs of pain or stretching her back. Instead, she remains with the team for a moment before simply walking away. No trainer goes with her, and no member of the medical staff follows her toward the locker room. The broadcast crew doesn't mention any injury, and the coaching staff isn't signaling for medical attention either. She quietly leaves the floor. Think about what usually happens in virtually every other professional basketball game. When a player exits because of an injury in the NBA or leaves the game for any medical reason, there's typically an immediate response. The training staff is alerted, someone from the medical team accompanies the player, and the broadcast is informed so viewers receive an update. There's a clear protocol that is consistently followed every single time. None of that appears to happen here. The Indiana Fever have a complete medical staff and established procedures for injury situations. Yet Caitlin Clark, the franchise player and the biggest star in women's basketball, simply walks alone to the locker room while her team remains in a timeout huddle during a tied game.
No! This is weird. This looks crazy. This is fishy. That's fishy, bro. Where is the training staff if she's hurt?
Not going to return.
Where's the training staff? There's no trainer.
Third quarter.
If she's standing here in the huddle, if her back is hurt, wouldn't there be a trainer somewhere checking on her? Wouldn't she be sitting at the end of the bench getting checked on? Nothing. She's in the huddle, realize, yo, I got yanked out, I'm pissed. And I'm out of here.
What makes this entire situation seem even more unusual is what happened afterward. The broadcast had absolutely no information for more than 30 minutes. 30 minutes in today's modern sports media environment. When a star player leaves a game, updates normally begin circulating almost immediately. Teams have PR staff whose responsibility is to communicate injury information to broadcasters, and the league wants fans to stay informed about its biggest stars. Yet in this case, there was complete silence. The announcers had nothing they could share with viewers. They couldn't explain what happened, when it happened, or what the diagnosis might be. That's not the typical way injury situations are handled in professional sports. Compare this with any other high-profile injury involving the WNBA this season. When players suffer legitimate injuries, the information usually arrives quickly. The team announces it, the broadcast relays it, and fans understand what's going on. But here, there was a communication blackout that lasted nearly half an hour. That could suggest the team itself didn't have a clear explanation for why its star player had left the game, pointing towards something other than a straightforward injury situation.
I think this Stephanie White thing is weird, man. I think it's very weird what went down. I think it's fishy. I think it's shaky. Like, I'm not buying that, bro. I'm not buying that. I'm really not. I think something was going on with her and Stephanie White, and she's pissed that Stephanie White benched her, and I don't blame her. People are saying Clark mysteriously exited the game. Somebody needs to explain. Listen, something's fishy, man.
To fully understand what may have happened, it's important to look at the relationship between Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White because that context matters. When White was hired as the head coach of the Indiana Fever, there was plenty of excitement surrounding the decision due to her championship experience in the WNBA. She won a title as a player, previously served as a head coach, and has strong ties to Indiana basketball. On paper, it appeared to be an excellent fit. However, coaching Caitlin Clark brings a unique set of challenges. Clark isn't just the franchise player, she's currently the face of the entire league. She's attracting unprecedented attention and generating significant revenue for the WNBA. She's helping sell out road arenas, driving television ratings to record highs, and she's a player who has always been accustomed to having considerable freedom on the court. During her time at Iowa, she had the flexibility to play her style of basketball, take calculated risks, and work through mistakes without being immediately pulled from the game. Stephanie White's coaching philosophy is noticeably more structured and disciplined. She expects players to operate within the system, quickly addresses mistakes with substitutions, and holds everyone to the same standard regardless of star status. In theory, that's a coaching approach many admire. But when managing a generational talent who performs best with freedom and confidence, that style can sometimes create friction, and this situation may be reflecting that tension in real time.
In this footage, what do we have? You're going to see, right here, you're going to see Caitlin Clark. She makes a three. Mind you, that video of Caitlin Clark grabbing her back, that was in the second quarter with like 6 minutes left. She played 4 minutes after that, seemed fine. She scored after that. She played fine in the second quarter after that. In the third quarter, she had a couple assists. She hit a bomb of a three you're about to see. Watch this sequence when Stephanie White snaps on Caitlin Clark.
One key point this analysis highlights is something many people seem to be overlooking. The official explanation was a back injury, and that's ultimately what the team reported. However, when you carefully follow the sequence of events, notice the absence of the usual medical protocol, observe the coach's visibly frustrated reaction, and see how quickly Clark was taken out of the game. A different interpretation begins to take shape. It appears to suggest a player who became frustrated after being pulled from a tied game following a single mistake and decided she was finished for the night. Now, could Caitlin Clark have been dealing with some back soreness? It's certainly possible, as most basketball players experience some level of physical discomfort throughout a long season. The real question is whether that back issue was serious enough to force her out of the game, or whether it later became a convenient explanation following a confrontation with the coaching staff. Based on this interpretation, the evidence seems to point toward the latter. The timing appears especially convenient, the lack of visible medical protocol stands out, and the communication delay raises additional questions. More broadly, this situation reflects the current challenges facing the Indiana Fever as an organization. They have the biggest star in women's basketball, a player who has dramatically influenced the financial landscape of the WNBA. Caitlin Clark's presence has helped increase franchise valuations across the league, attracted corporate sponsors who previously paid little attention to women's basketball, and created a media phenomenon that extends well beyond traditional WNBA audiences. The overall economic impact of Caitlin Clark is difficult to overstate, but managing a player with that level of star power also creates organizational pressure that most WNBA teams have never experienced before. The Indiana Fever transformed from a struggling franchise with limited attendance and very little media attention into the center of the basketball world almost overnight. That's an enormous adjustment for everyone involved, from ownership and the coaching staff to the organization's support personnel, and it's clear they're still learning how to manage that reality. Stephanie White is working to establish a strong culture and a consistent system while building a team capable of competing for championships rather than depending solely on one player's individual brilliance. That's a sensible long-term strategy. However, in the short term, it can naturally create moments of friction with a player like Caitlin Clark, who has always been accustomed to being the focal point and having the freedom to play through mistakes. That tension isn't necessarily harmful to the team's overall development, but it can lead to situations like the one seen in this game, where a relatively minor disagreement appears to grow into something much bigger. Another important factor is the intense media scrutiny surrounding Clark. Nearly everything involving Caitlin Clark becomes a major story. Every substitution is analyzed, and every interaction with coaches is closely examined. That level of attention makes it far more difficult for the organization to handle internal matters privately. When Clark leaves a game and doesn't return, it quickly becomes a national conversation. As a result, the team may feel pressure to provide an explanation, even if the underlying issue is simply a disagreement between a player and coach that could otherwise be resolved internally. What makes this particular situation especially controversial is the way it appeared to be handled. If it truly was only a back injury, standard medical procedures would typically have been followed. Trainers likely would have been visible, the broadcast would usually have been informed right away, and Clark would generally have been evaluated on the bench before heading to the locker room. None of that was visible, leading this interpretation to suggest the team may have been caught off guard by Clark's departure and later settled on an explanation. If the situation instead involved a disagreement between player and coach, that wouldn't be unusual in professional sports. Players and coaches regularly disagree. Star players become frustrated after being taken out of games, and coaches react when execution falls short. Those situations happen and are often resolved through communication. According to this interpretation, the larger issue is the perception that a medical explanation was presented instead of addressing the underlying conflict directly, and that's where trust can begin to erode. It also affects the relationship between the organization and the fans who are paying close attention to every development. Consider the broader context of how the Indiana Fever have managed Caitlin Clark's playing time and minutes throughout the season. There have been several games where her substitution patterns raised questions, including moments when she was taken out during critical stretches or remained on the bench longer than many expected. Each time, speculation followed about whether those decisions were simply part of a planned rotation or reflected possible tension between Clark and the coaching staff. This latest situation only adds more momentum to those conversations. Comparing it to the way other WNBA teams handle their star players is also revealing. Look at how the Las Vegas Aces manage Aya Wilson or how the New York Liberty work with Breanna Stewart. Those organizations appear to have established strong communication between their stars and coaching staffs, with a clear understanding of roles, minutes, and decision-making. As a result, these types of public situations rarely become major storylines because those teams have found a balance between star power and team structure. The Indiana Fever, however, are still working toward that balance. They're in a relatively new phase with new ownership, a new head coach, and a young superstar whose impact has exceeded nearly every expectation. Growing pains are to be expected, but this situation emphasizes the importance of stronger communication and more clearly defined protocols. When something involves your franchise player, there needs to be a consistent plan for handling it in a way that maintains credibility with the fan base. What happens next could be extremely important for the Fever's season and for Caitlin Clark's relationship with Stephanie White. If this situation truly involved a disagreement that was later explained through an injury report, the organization will need to resolve it internally and move forward. If there are legitimate concerns about Clark's back, then providing clear information about the injury and recovery timeline becomes equally important. Either way, the organization faces the challenge of rebuilding trust with fans who are now questioning every update regarding Clark's status. The reality is that Caitlin Clark carries significant leverage in this entire situation. The situation is different because she's far more than just another player who can be managed through traditional coaching methods. She's the driving force behind the Fever's soaring franchise value, the reason arenas continue selling out, and the reason national media consistently follows this team. If there truly is a conflict between her and the coaching staff, the organization has to handle it carefully and find a solution that keeps everyone moving in the same direction. Losing Caitlin Clark, whether through trade demands, frustration, or a relationship that starts affecting her performance, would be devastating for this franchise. At the same time, Stephanie White also deserves the authority to coach her team without being constantly second-guessed. She was brought in to build a winning culture, and that means holding every player accountable, including the biggest star on the roster. The real challenge is finding the right balance between accountability and autonomy, between structure and freedom. That is what coaching at the highest level is all about, and it becomes even more difficult when the player in question has Caitlin Clark's rare combination of talent, attention, and influence. So where does that leave everything? We have a situation that was officially described as a back injury, but in this interpretation, looks much more like a player-coach conflict that escalated during the game. We have a franchise trying to manage unprecedented pressure and attention, a coach trying to establish her system and authority, and a superstar still adjusting to the professional level while carrying the expectations that come with the league's renewed popularity. At some point, something has to give. Either the Fever figure out how to navigate these tensions and build a strong working relationship among everyone involved, or situations like this will keep happening as the season goes on. The real issue is not just whether Caitlin Clark's back was sore that night. The bigger issue is whether this organization can build the trust, communication, and stability needed to handle disagreements without turning them into public controversies. Right now, that trust looks shaky, and once trust starts breaking down between a star player and the coaching staff, it becomes very difficult to repair. The Fever need to get this right quickly, because the stakes are too high and the spotlight is too bright for this kind of situation to keep repeating.